session of the day, which is making sense of the transitional world order. And I would like to invite our founder and CEO, Dr. Abhinav Pandya. And he is the founder and CEO of Usanas Foundation. And I think there was a slip of tongue earlier, so apologies for that. And he has written 3 books. And he has been to Cornell University, and he did his graduation from St. Stephen's College. A prominent voice when it comes to international relations and foreign policy. Very well researched books, and I would really appreciate when you conduct this session, if you could bring in your insights and your point of view in during the discussion, so that all of us can benefit, those who haven't read about the books. Please, thank you so much, and welcome Dr. Abhinav Pandya.
Thank you very much, Aditi. Let me state at the outset that my background has mostly been in the security side. I'm a terrorism man. My research has mostly focused on that. And after starting this think tank, I have started making forays into the world of geopolitics and diplomacy. But as a researcher, as an analyst, I feel that while thinking about foreign policy and contemplating about that, I guess security is one of the most crucial, in fact, one of the foremost objective in one's mind, and particularly when we are living in a country like India. In our situation, definitely the security constitutes the most important pillar and objective of the foreign policy. So with that background and with that fundamental vision, I decided to keep this session in this MPAGD 2025, making sense of the transitional world order. Making sense, rationalizing is a very, very primary human instinct. We try to make sense, but the way things are unfolding in front of us, maybe it's too early, maybe it's, I would say it's too early trying to make sense of the situation or trying to predict the situation, make strategic forecasting about it. Things have started unfolding, and we certainly see very drastic changes in this world order. But yes, as human beings, as promoters and protectors of peace and global prosperity, I guess we must do our duty and try to make sense of the situation. So before we begin the session, I'll invite the eminent panelist for today's session. I would like to invite the eminent panelist for today's session, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. He is Dean Strategic and International Relations at OP Jindal Global University, and he is the former Indian Ambassador to France and one of the most prolific voices in the field of geopolitics and foreign policy, and also a great inspiration for the young students and researchers. We have Dr. Andrei Kurtunov with us. He is the Academic Director of the Russian International Affairs Council. Most experienced and very insightful voice in the field of international relations. We have Dr. Michael Rubin with us. He's a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute, and he's former advisor to Pentagon. He has appeared for our previous events also, and one of the most insightful voices in the field of terrorism and conflict issues. Then we have Dr. Zhang Weiwei. He is a professor at Fudan University, director of his China Institute, and a senior research fellow at Tsinghua Institute in Shanghai. He is one of the most insightful authority on the idea of civilizational states, and I must say a celebrity scholar. I would like to welcome Dr. Zhang Weiwei. So yes. Before we begin the session, I would just like to briefly mention a few things. Today, as we all discuss and we reiterate that world order is in the state of flux, post-Second World War, the world order which was established, I wouldn't say it's shattering, but certainly it's facing major challenges. Bipolarity was over long back, and even the unipolar moment of US is now over. That's an established consensus. Multipolarity looks like the future. The era of hegemony is also under duress. Civilizational states are becoming the new leaders of the global geopolitics. Multilateral institutions, particularly the Washington Consensus, stands challenged. UN and its effectiveness is again a matter of debate. We face a lot of questions from the leader of countries of the global south. They demand equity, inclusivity, and diversity. We have new minilaterals and plurilaterals coming in the global geopolitics, which, in my opinion, I feel that when global institutions like the UN fail to serve its purpose, or face serious questions, then such arrangements do come up. In the tech world, the new Cold War has begun. AI is not just a battlefield. It is not just, it is a new battleground. It is not just an instrument of war, but also a new battlefield. Arms race is back with 5th generation fighter crafts, hypersonic missiles, and nuclear weapons. World appears to be on the cusp of multiple conflict. Conflict theaters are activating across the globe. Ukraine-Russia situation, West Asia, Taiwan Straits, Himalayan borders, Armenia-Azerbaijan borders. The global security architecture is going through significant churning. There already appears to be two opponent groups or blocks. It looks vague at this stage, but definitely many commentators and analysts tend to think in those lines. On one side, we have Iran, Russia, North Korea, China. On the other side, US, Israel, and Europe. And besides that, there is also a third segment of countries like India who would want to protect their strategic autonomy and take a neutral stand. Then there is a debate between democracy and authoritarianism. However, there are counterfactuals. Even in the Western Bloc or the US-led West, NATO and the Atlanticists are facing significant challenges, internal cracks, particularly after the arrival of Trump as the US president. Countries like Turkey continue to engage various blocs at the same time and also pursue their independent agenda of some kind of a proto-caliphate. Global South has its own worries other than the global wars. Countries like India refuse to accept the to blocs and alliances, and they prefer to maintain their strategic autonomy. In the domain of discourses, we see a major debate between democracy and authoritarianism. Questions galore: what are the main threats to democracy? Now, here also some fundamental questions arise. Is democracy facing a threat just from the nation states or the countries which tend to believe in a different ideology? Or maybe there is some fundamental churning going in the world, in the society, in politics that is challenging the idea of democracy, such as things like AI, the tech part, the widespread and massive social media and the perception war. Widespread and massive social media, the AI, the bots, they can interfere in your elections. And as Henry Kissinger said rightly before his death, that AI right now, it's a completely new phenomenon, and we don't know what's going to happen in another 5 to 7 years with the AI. Yuval Noah Harari also mentions that it is in the stage of amoeba right now, and AI's evolution is not like the human evolution. AI's evolution will be much, much faster. So whether our notions of democracy, our methods of electoral democracy will continue to exist as they are existing right now or not is again a big question. And even the sovereignty, whether the idea of sovereignty will face challenges from nation states, terrorist actors, or even the global big tech giants who control the technology. That is also a question which we need to reflect. Alongside, terrorism and religious extremism continues to exist and intensify. We have terrorist actors forming governments in various countries. Taliban recently formed the government in Afghanistan. In Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham formed the government. And particularly in these interesting times where you have conflicting countries and the geopolitical situation is in the state of flux, these so-called terrorist regimes are able to leverage these differences and find a place for themselves in the world order, and also continue with their oppressive activities against the females and their anti-human rights activities and perpetuate their regimes. I must say, Ambassador Azhar was here yesterday, but there's something very surprising that October 7 attacks in Israel, most of the Hamas terrorists, they were trained in Afghanistan in the Al-Qaeda camps, and Haqqanis were providing the security to those camps. Afghan Taliban was involved, Pakistan Taliban was involved, Haibatullah Akhundzada and his brigade was involved. Brigadier Kazemi from IRGC was actively involved. Now this marks a very strong beginning of a confluence between the West Asian and South Asian terror groups, and also between the Shia and Sunni terror groups. And most recently, right after that report which came out about the training of these terrorists in Afghanistan, we found that Hamas cadres were sharing the dais with Kashmir-centric terrorist groups in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Even in the immediate aftermath of the attack on Israel, Hamas cadres were lecturing a PFI gathering in Kerala in an online mode. So this certainly it raises alarm bells for India, and it's a matter of serious concern. In the field of social world, we see a major conflict between the wokeism and traditionalism. There is a civilizational and cultural struggle. So these major changes that are happening at the societal level, there's basically a clash of values. So in this era of information and perception war, the era of delusions, chimeras, illusions and smoke screens, wisdom and sanity takes the biggest toll. We say that this is the age of Kali, and Rahu is one planet who can play ducks and drakes with your mind. It's a planet which is adept at manipulating minds. So particularly in this era of information war, we see a very, very active role of Rahu, confusing you, killing your sanity, wisdom, and the judgment to define between the right and the wrong. And in a lighter vein, I must say that a large number of Indian astrologers are making some very dire predictions about the emerging world order. Though as a scholar, we don't take them seriously, we don't even factor them into serious studies, but definitely, sometimes I do like to venture into those areas and listen to their thoughts also. So as I mentioned, we have some really eminent panelists, and I would like to go ahead with these discussions. First, I would like to invite Dr. Zhang Vivi, and welcome Dr. Zhang Vivi. We have a few questions for you. And before we begin, I must say that I'll request every speaker to keep their the initial thoughts to 10 to 12 minutes, and after that we'll follow with the Q&A session. So Dr. Zhang Vivi, can you hear me? Dr. Vivi?
Can I start? I could not hear clearly.
Yes, I can hear you. I would like to I would like to mention a few questions. After that, I'll request you. So, China is the elephant in the room. It's at the forefront of the tech war. So my first question, how do you see the tech war between the China and US unfolding? Secondly, do you think...
I did not catch, but the sound effect not very good.
Okay, I'll just repeat it once again. I said that China is the elephant
it's
in the room.
It's a question for me, right?
Yes. China is the elephant in the room. It's at the forefront of tech war, and we have seen with the DeepSeek that the tech war between China and the US has already begun. How do you see that unfolding in the future? Secondly, do you believe that there is a replacement for dollar? Third, do you believe...
Here.
Not clear?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Maybe I can speak first.
I can hear you.
You put questions, if not very clearly, you send the email to me, I read them, or send this to the WeChat, I answer them one by one.
Okay.
But I could not hear, I just hear a lot of noise, but not exact words, I could not understand now.
Okay.
Problem with communications. With
just a moment. I'll send you the questions via some online method. I'm telling Dr. Ellis to send you the questions. Okay.
Either no sound or interrupted sounds.
Yes.
张老师，要不这样，你拿我这边这样听，对，听他那边跟你说，那可以，从我这边。
我可以试试看，我手机开就好了。
OK。
没有声音吗？Yeah, now I can hear you. Thank you.
Yes.
Finally, good.
Yes, a few questions for you.
Oh, please.
China is the elephant in the room. The tech war. Do you see the tech war between the US and China unfolding?
Actually, okay.
Secondly, just let me finish my
questions
and then you can take.
Okay.
Secondly, do you believe that the replacement for dollar is possible?
Okay.
In your opinion, what is the position of the US, West, and countries like India in the multipolar world order?
Okay.
And my last question, we see definitely China is doing an amazing work in terms of economic growth, in terms of helping other countries. But then, let me be very frank, there are some credibility issues also related
support which is being extended to various parts
and our economic added support being extended to various parts of the world. There is some
address these questions. I mean,
to the BRI project. So how to address these questions? I mean, please explain us China's rise as a civilization state. Thank you.
Okay. Well, China's rise as a civilizational state, which means, can you hear me clearly?
yes,
You can, huh?
yes.
Is it okay? Can you hear me? Can my voice reach your side? Okay. Shall I continue?
Yes. Please continue, yes. Hello?
我可以继续吗？ Can I continue? Okay, let me continue. Okay. So let me go over these 4 questions one by one. Concerning this tech war launched by the United States, obviously we said very clearly from the very beginning in 2018, the United States will lose this tech war. Because based on very stupid assumption that no, China cannot innovate, China can only copy. And it's stupidity in the stereotypes created by the Western mainstream media. In the end, it hurts itself. We knew very clearly China can do equally well. Now, whether it's Huawei, the 6th generation of jet, or DeepSeek, which already means the failure of the full stop. Yeah. Whether the dollar can be replaced or not, the problem with the dollar is it's weaponized by the United States against Russia, and it's also obviously a possible threat to most other countries with big breaching reserves, including dollar reserves. So the trend towards dollarization, de-dollarization is irresistible. Now, let me quote my friend, former Greek financial minister, Yannis. He said at this particular moment, there are only 2 systems. One is represented by SWIFT, which is like a highway with a lot of traffic, but with a lot of holes and bumpy, still a lot of traffic. There's another highway, brand new, not much used yet. It's the Chinese digital payment system and even digital currency. So this very existence of an alternative, don't forget China is already the largest trading nation with over 140 countries, and China is their largest trading partners. So that makes the United States very nervous. In other words, I said repeatedly, if for one reason or another, the United States decided to apply sanctions, same style as it did to Russia, I will say with certainty, next day, Chinese currency will be international currency within 24 hours or 48 hours. Because most countries want to have trade with China. If they cannot buy with dollars, they have to buy with Chinese currency, including the United States. Third one is concerning US, the West, a multipolar world, and India's role. I think India is a great nation. I've been to India 3 or 4 times. This time, really, I feel sorry. This is a great opportunity. Everything was ready. By last minute, there was an important conference in Beijing. I have no way but to go there, and even trying to ask for leave, but I was not allowed to. I have to go there. So it's an important conference, which is also good. But I really feel sorry, unable to come to India this time. But India is a great nation. I think India should definitely be one pole with its own position, clearly different from other countries, other poles. Sometimes in agreement with others, sometimes different from others. So only natural being a big power. I think it's India should be an independent pole. United States is a pole. China is a pole. Russia is a pole. EU hopefully will become a pole. And maybe some other institution like Southeast Asian, ASEAN, will also be a pole. So I think that this will be multipolar world. It's already more or less there. But what we need is a multipolar world order. Multipolar world is already there, but the multipolar world order is not yet there. The last question, I did not hear the whole question, but I heard it about the BRI and how to explain this to international audience, to Indian friends. Base is very simple. There's a huge infrastructure deficit in the world. Most developing countries need infrastructure building, and even among the Western countries, including the United States, there are huge demand for infrastructure building. Yet this vacuum somehow is always there. So China said, let's do something, to fill this gap. This is how we should envisage this kind of reform of the existing international order, international system, which can no longer meet the demands of so many developing countries, including some other countries. So Chinese idea is based on very important principles, different from Western, many mainstream Western ideas, called the discussing together, building together, benefiting together. In other words, a country or company joins BRI out of its own initiative. China will not compel any other country or any other company to join it. So by now, $1 trillion already invested, over 4,000, 5,000 projects going on. So it's the largest platform for common good or for development at this particular stage. So that's my brief answer to your 4 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. VP, for your insightful comments.
I'll certainly get back to you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I'll get back to you with some more intriguing
I can hear you.
in the Q&A round. But before that, I would like to invite my American friend, Dr. Michael Rubin, to answer to your comments and thoughts. I would just like to read some questions here. So, Dr. Rubin, welcome to the panel. We just saw our dear Chinese friend, making some very insightful and interesting remarks. So first, I would like you to answer to those remarks, and then I have some very special questions for you. So in this changing world order, how do you look at the US position? Do you think that it's a declining power? Or, my second question, is the US ready for the multipolar world? Third question, what do you think about the US role in the West Asia? And the last one on the Indian studies.
Thank you very much. Let me answer the questions these ways. First of all, as some of you know, my grandfather came from Russia, and my father-in-law was born in Russia, as was my wife. And there's an old Russian joke about the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. The Russian pessimist is the one who says, things have never been so bad. War, economy, environment, health, they couldn't possibly get worse. And the Russian optimist is the one who said, no, 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 they can always get worse. So let me begin by giving an optimistic talk. What I see right now in all the talk of multipolarity, the decline or not of the United States is actually something a little bit different. Throughout the course of history, there have been handoffs between major powers, but the only peaceful handoff between the dominant powers was that between the British Empire to the United States. Every other handoff of power had resulted in a major war. Now, while we look at whether or not the United States will remain a hyperpower or whatever you want to call it, and we can talk about China, we can talk about Russia, we can talk about the European Union and so forth, I would actually argue that demography is destiny. And when we look at Russia, when we look at China especially, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and so forth, we see a demographic precipice, especially in regard to China, due to the 36 plus years, the legacy of the 36 plus years of the one-child policy. When the United Nations had talked about India becoming the most populous country on earth, the lead was buried in a lot of the newspaper reporting, because it wasn't simply that India was becoming the most populous country on earth. It was the rapidity of the decline in China's population, which then raises questions, at least from Washington's perspective, about whether the issue is the rise of China or the potential fallout of the decline of China. Now, this also has an impact militarily. When we consider that China is perhaps the only country in the world that has a military that is exclusively made up of single children, specifically single sons, and what the social ramifications of that could be, should there actually ever be a conflict. Now, one of my major criticisms of the West and of the United States is the inability to recognize ideology. And if you're going to look at the world through grievance, through which then have a solution of diplomatic formulas, reconfiguring this, that, or the other thing to come to some mutual understanding, it can be deceptive. Because ideology matters in a way that I think many Americans have forgotten. And this comes into play when we talk about some of what's emanating from Pakistan, some of what's emanating from the Islamic Republic of Iran, especially what's now coming out of Turkey, as well as other countries in the world. The United States remains blind of that. As a historian, I get paid to predict the past, and my critics would say that I only get that right about half the time. But when I look at recent American history, ever since George H.W. Bush, the elder President Bush, every US president's foreign policy legacy has been defined by the crisis that no one saw coming during the campaign. And I still think that's true today. We can talk about the here and now, but I suspect that we, just as with the COVID pandemic, what actually is going to change the world and the dynamics are the crises that we're not necessarily recognizing today. And when I look at the Middle East specifically, one of those crises is born out of transitions. And again, in the United States at least, and I would accuse other countries, the People's Republic of China, Russia, and the European Union of doing this too. We tend to calibrate our policy to the present. But when we look, for example, at Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian chairman, he is 89 years old. He's in the 20th year of his 4-year presidential term. And unlike Yasser Arafat before him, he hasn't appointed a successor. When I look at the terrorist attack of October 7th, 2023, the largest single-day massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, what I see is not just that it occurred on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, and not simply that it was on a Jewish holiday. I also see it as the opening shot in a competition to see who's going to take over Palestinian leadership, especially in the West Bank, and perhaps after that in Jordan as well. Again, we can't calibrate our policy towards the here and now. The same thing is true with Khamenei. I mean, in Washington, we navel gaze, and we like to think the world revolves around us, and I'll be the first to admit it doesn't. But when Ali Khamenei dies, he's 85 years old, he's had cancer twice, he's partially paralyzed from a 1981 assassination attempt. What could happen in Iran? No one saw what was going to happen in Syria back in 2011. do we really expect the neighboring states of Iran not to involve themselves in a succession crisis? Let me also say that what we need to face is a crisis with regard to capitalism. I especially, within the United States, look at the impact and the attitudes of a younger generation towards capitalism. What I find frustrating as someone in my 50s is when I look at East Asia, when I look at Africa, and Africa is where I spend a good deal of my time right now, especially in the Horn of Africa and in the Great Lakes region. What I see is a region that picked itself out. Over the last 3 decades, more than 2 billion people have picked themselves out of poverty by embracing free market reforms. And yet, what we see with a new generation in the United States, at least among some political classes, as well as in the European Union among some political classes, is a headlong embrace of, if you will, the state-centered economies, the socialistic economies, which arguably were responsible for the failure to thrive prior to those 3 decades before. And I'll also, say that this applies to China as well, where it was an embrace of reforms, which really enabled the Chinese economy to take off. So that is one issue, the transition to the younger generation. It's not just between countries. There's a generational change. When I'm in Morocco, whenever I travel, I like to go to universities to talk to students. And one thing I noticed, let me just give you the example of Morocco, is students will talk about, and academics will talk about the crisis in education and how people are going to, there's a deficit, they need to get jobs, everyone still wants a state center, that state pension, everything like that. But do people, if you're trying to get to where we are now, what are you doing to prepare the future generation for automation? Do people in Morocco or Egypt really believe that automation is going to pass them by? And what are going to be the societal ramifications if that transition isn't handled smoothly? It can be almost quaint to talk about the conflict between China, the United States, and Russia. But I'm much more worried about some of the high population countries that are going to have a problem actually being able to capture the talent and energy of their youth. Now, the last thing, when it comes to India, I welcome India's rise. And India, I think, and this is why I'm a big advocate of the US-India partnership, I would like to see an alliance of democracies. I would agree with the ambassador from yesterday that I think the United Nations is deeply, deeply flawed, and it's long past time to talk about reform. The problem is, I don't think reform can be handled with a scalpel. I think it can be handled with, I think it needs to be handled with an axe at this point. And when you have a patient with a bleeding chest wound, you don't slap a Band-Aid on it. The fact of the matter is that the UN becomes a place, and many international organizations, where crises are punted to fail to address them, rather than a place that resolves the situation. And part of this also goes back to ideology, where in the West we can be naive and we think diplomacy is all about how to get to yes, how to get to a solution, and we ignore that some of our adversaries might actually look at diplomacy as an asymmetric warfare strategy to tie America's hands and the present world order's hands while they try to establish other facts on the ground. And perhaps the same thing can be said of America at times, especially with our attitude towards international law. But when I hear people quote international law, oftentimes I think they're armchair dictators because they believe that they can be the judge and the jury without any shades of gray or openness to interpretation or appreciation of precedents. But with that, look, I embrace my think tank role to try to be provocative. I hope I've been provocative enough. Trust me, I have some things in reserve for Q&A, but I don't want to monopolize the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rubin. 2 questions. We'll have a detailed Q&A later, but 2 questions because I found your comments very interesting. First, regarding the US wars. Dr. John Mearsheimer, he has openly said in many forums that he did not like the idea of this Russia-Ukraine, US supporting the Zelensky in the Russia-Ukraine situation. And it seems that Mr. Donald Trump is going to bring some kind of a rapprochement between the 2 countries soon. So, and another one, in the West Asia, though the ceasefire has taken place, but are you optimistic about it? And secondly, it seems that the Israel faces an existential threat from Iran. So if this ceasefire doesn't work, and if the situation escalates in the West Asia, and if US gets involved, do you think that it will give more space and leverage to China to pursue its goal in the Taiwan Straits or in other ways? And the last one, just one more. So regarding the India-US thing, these days we talk a lot about the deep state in the Indian media, in the Indian social media circles. I have a very fundamental question. We all would like to know what exactly is the US deep state.
Okay. Let me start with the crisis with regard to Hamas. Actually, first of all, let me just remind everyone in the room, what is the world's deadliest conflict right now? It's not Ukraine, it's not Gaza, it's Sudan. And perhaps we also need to be a little bit introspective in the West with regard to recognizing the discrepancy between what causes press attention versus where some of the true crises really are. When it comes to Hamas, look, again, I'm a historian, so I get paid to predict the past. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the ceasefire is going to fail. Why? Because Hamas's charter is dedicated to genocide. It's dedicated to the eradication of the state of Israel. It is completely at odds with the Oslo Accords, and if the international community gives a free pass on eliding the commitment that was required under the Oslo Accords for a cessation of terror and a recognition of Israel, then what you're doing is setting the stage for all diplomacy to fail in the future, because adversaries will recognize that diplomacy can be an asymmetric warfare strategy, that agreements aren't necessarily worth the paper they are written on. When people say, well, Hamas is a fact of life, the same people, just before Operation Grim Reaper, or whatever we want to call it, with regard to the eradication of Hezbollah, were saying the same thing with regard to Hezbollah. And I spent most of my COVID time in either Baghdad or southern Lebanon with Hezbollah. I think I'm the only American that met both the Iranian president and the head of the Quds Force. They used to call me, though, Pasari Shaitani Bozorg, son of the great Satan. When people say you can't get rid of Hamas, well, I was young, but people said the same thing about, would you say the same thing about the Khmer Rouge? After all, it was an odious ideology that controlled territory. Sometimes, and this is where I'm grateful for Israel, they showed the creativity can advance policy in a way where we don't need to worry. We don't need to defer to the constraints of debate that are established by the terrorist groups themselves. There was a US Supreme Court justice named Potter Stewart who litigated a famous case with regard to pornography. And in his finding, he said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And one of the problems we have in the West, and we can talk about this later, is terrorism is done the same way. There is no internationally accepted definition of terrorism, no consensus definition. When it comes to Ukraine, look, I'll be honest. I certainly sympathize with the Ukrainians in this. But one of the problems we have in Washington, and I would say in many other areas, is this notion that somehow there's a magic formula and that there isn't a nuance to solutions. In the case, the way the Washington debate is going, is that we need to continue to support Ukraine, simply because if we don't, the ramifications for the calculations in Beijing with regard to Taiwan could create a replication that would be far more deadly. If we draw a circle on a map around China and India, more people live in that circle than live outside that circle. And while we've had wars in Europe, we haven't had a major war in that circle, and the ramifications of a conflict in that circle would be devastating to such an interlinked global economy. With regard to the US deep state, look, I mean, I'll go back to Parkinson's law about the nature of bureaucracy and how bureaucracy continues to grow. What I would say is that since Donald Trump and Elon Musk began the mass layoffs, my commute 6 miles or 10 kilometers into Washington, D.C. is a lot smoother since, I mean, there's just no more traffic jams. But the deep state, the problem in the United States is despite, again, this goes to navel gazing, we all believe that we have a national consensus. We no longer have a national consensus. One of the greatest impacts of everyone from Barack Obama to Donald Trump is an erosion of American institutions. First it was the press, and the press now polls lower than your average child molester. Now you have the politicization of the military and a lack of faith in the military. Ever since the end of a conscription military, when I went to an Ivy League school, and I have friends who are now congressmen and senators, former classmates of mine, and that sort of thing. And governors. The fact of the matter is that they will often represent an ideology that, if they believe their own Twitter feeds, if they're only talking to their friends, if there's no common institution which is uniting us, if they have no idea what it's like to serve in the military, then ultimately that creates fault lines. So when I see some of the debates we have now, I see it less as a reaction to the rise of Russia or China or other countries, because again, I think with demography, these countries may actually be teetering on the precipice of decline. Rather, I see the problem being a lack of American national consensus, and that's also being borne out in Europe a great deal as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Kursunov, yes, a few questions for you. First is, how do you look at Russia's role in the European security architecture, particularly if this rapprochement between the US and Russia happens, with the initiative of President Donald Trump, and also given the fact that Mr. Trump is not very interested in, continuing all that aid to the NATO, and this transatlanticists are facing a major challenge. So after that, Russia's role in the European security architecture. My second question, so if this, crisis finds some kind of a solution, is that going to impact your friendship with the Chinese? Because you have a history of conflict with China. In the past, US and China partnered to counter the Russians. So recently, with the resolution of this conflict, will your support kind of dry down when you talk about the robust partnership with China? And my third question, what is going to be your future strategy in the South Caucasus? I mean, if there's a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, a serious major war, a major conflict, how is Russia going to react?
Thank you for the questions, and once again, thank you for giving me a chance to be here and to participate in the second panel. I will definitely touch upon the issues that you raised, but let me start with a small lyrical digression, or rather historical digression. We have just marked a rather important anniversary, which might have gone unnoticed in India, but definitely not in Russia. 80 years ago, in Crimea, Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt got together for the so-called Yalta Conference, where they decided on the future of the world order. And we still live in this Yalta system, which helped us to avoid a major war between great powers for 80 years. But now we see this system unraveling and disintegrating. So if you go to Moscow and ask an expert or maybe a politician what we should do, the standard answer would be, we need a second Yalta. We need big boys, maybe big boys and big girls, though I think we still don't have a gender balance in the global politics, but we need to have big actors like the United States, China, Russia, India, the European Union, let them get together and fix the world order so that we can live, if not happily, at least decently, without a major war for another 80 years. If you take my opinion, which is probably not a majority opinion in Moscow these days, I don't believe in this vision. And there are a number of reasons why I'm skeptical about the second Yalta. First of all, historically, new world orders emerged after big wars. The big wars allowed to fix the balance of powers between major players, and the victorious ones, they could demonstrate more generosity or less generosity towards defeated, but they could indeed get together and fix the rules of the game. That was the case after the religious wars in Europe, the Westphalian peace, then after Napoleonic Wars, the Versailles, the Vienna system, the First World War, the Versailles system, and finally Yalta. Today, we cannot afford the luxury of a big war. The big war will be devastating. It will be the end of our civilization. And we cannot therefore fix the balance of powers. Any attempt to fix the balance of powers will be questioned. The second issue is the issue of legitimacy. After the Second World War, the victorious powers have a credit of legitimacy because they defeated the evil. And everyone knew that. Everyone was ready to accept the world in which these powers will take more responsibility than others. We don't have such legitimacy today. And indeed, you know, when Erdogan, let's say, says that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations is not the world, it's much less than the world, he's right. But if Turkey wants to play a role in defining the new world order, why not Armenia? If India is a part of this new arrangement, why not Pakistan? Why not Sri Lanka? So it is much more difficult today than it was 80 years ago. And of course, the world is much larger. We have not 50 plus nation states, but almost 200 nation states. And finally, we should not forget about non-state actors. You have Elon Musk, who controls more money than many nations do. We have many trans-border movements, religious, political. We have civil society, and they also want to be a part of the game. So I don't think that there is a magic solution, as it was mentioned. Does it mean that we should sit on our hands, doing nothing, waiting our world to continue unraveling and self-destructing? No, I don't think so. But my take is that the bottom-up approach these days will be more efficient than the top-down approach. It means that we should start with small arrangements, maybe situational arrangements, covering specific regions, be it Middle East or South Caucasus or Europe or East Asia, and we should gradually move to international regimes that could handle problems in different domains of international relations. Let's say artificial intelligence management or energy management or food security or migrations, and gradually move to something higher, to more controversial, more sensitive issues. I think that gradually we might finally get to a more inclusive and more democratic world order without trying to impose this order on the rest of the humanity, even if the big players are able to fix the problems among themselves. In the end of the day, we have to move to a new level of global governance, because if we don't do it, the future of mankind is not very promising. I think that we are actually facing an epic tragedy, maybe not today, maybe not in 5 years from now, but let's say in 20 or 30 years from now. Speaking of the issues that you addressed, let me just say that in terms of the European arrangement, I do believe that unfortunately Europe will continue to be divided for a long time. And I think we would be lucky if we could get to where we were during the Cold War, where there were clear red lines, where this confrontation did not exclude cooperation in certain areas of mutual interest. I don't think that potential settlement in Ukraine will jeopardize the Russia-China relations. I think that there are many interests that unite these two countries. Definitely the United States is pushing Beijing and Moscow closer to each other, but even without the United States, these are neighboring countries. We have a long border. The economic structures of the countries are complementing each other. So this cooperation will continue, but definitely it will continue along its natural modes rather than pushed by external factors. And finally, on South Caucasus, I think I do not represent the Russian government, but if I were to interpret the Russian position, my take is that Russia is pushing for regional issues to be handled by regional powers, including their major neighbors. That's why the Russian side is always pressing for the so-called 3+3 format, which includes Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and on top of that, major players like Russia, Iran, and Turkey to handle security and development issues of South Caucasus. I think that this idea is not easy to sell to some regional countries, and I understand why. But nevertheless, if we're thinking about South Caucasus, we should think about this place as a kind of natural ecosystem. You cannot resolve one problem without handling others' problems. You cannot deal with the relations between Baku and Yerevan without keeping Ankara in mind. You cannot think about transportation corridors without putting them into a broader perspective. So the approach should be comprehensive. I don't expect miracles. I think that Russia has to fight its uphill battle in the South Caucasus. But still, I think there are many reasons why Russia will be not only a deal taker, but also a deal maker in this important region of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kurtunov. I'll come back to you with more questions in the Q&A session. But so finally, we have our last speaker, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Sir, I have a few questions for you. Desired by the West and the East, India is in its sweetest position right now, as we all say. With Russia, we have a very special partnership and bonding. I distinctly remember I was going through my father's old archives, and even in a small village in the district of southern Rajasthan, I could come across old magazines like Soviet and all that. They're really getting rusty, but the kind of love which is there even among the common people, even now, that's really very motivating and inspiring, and it seems that India-Russia relationship is going to be stronger. With US, certainly, the ties are very strong, robust. I've myself been to Cornell, so I feel it's like a second home for me. So diplomatically speaking, definitely in this emerging world order, India is in a very sweet position to make significant advances. Modi government's Middle East policies or diplomatic approach has met with an astounding success. In the digital domain, we are really at the advanced frontiers of the technology, and in the field of defense, Atmanirbharta is a new norm, and we are trying hard. But yes, and also with even in the field of discourses and narratives, with the ideas of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and the world peace, Vishwa Shanti, Vishwa Bandhutva, and Vishwa Mitra, we are definitely trying to create a space for ourselves. However, having said that, I would like to argue that to take advantage of this situation, I guess we need to make tremendous amounts of preparations. Please allow me to bring some of the, I would say, the demerits or the weaker parts. In the field of defense, I guess we need much stronger preparation. In the field of air superiority, let me state it at the outset that we have like 31 squadrons right now. And to deal with the twin front war, we need at least 42 squadrons. And to be in a much better position, India must have a 57 squadron. Okay. And in the field of internal security, we have a massive challenge across the entire length and breadth of country from the Islamic extremism. And since I've worked in this field, please allow me to be a little more blunt and straightforward, since I'm not a diplomat. In every city, we have a situation, we can say that the communal riots can flare up anytime. In our neighbors, we are facing a very difficult time. Bangladesh has gone to the Islamists. With Nepal, things are very dicey. With Sri Lanka, it's okay. With Maldives, again, we face a bilateral challenge as well as the Islamic extremism challenge. In the field of education, I think our institutions are facing a major challenge. Look at the number of Scopus Index papers, the new research coming from India. So these are the things which we certainly need to contemplate when we talk about the bigger role that India intends to play, because today is the time of the comprehensive national power, and comprehensive national power is not just constituted by the military part, it's comprehensive, it includes various dimensions. So what exactly do we have to offer to the world in concrete terms, not just slogans?
So thank you very much, Dr. Abhinav Pandya. I'll begin with a self-delusionary statement that I may be the last but not the least. Perhaps I'm both, actually. So I will address whatever I had in mind, and then of course address the valid questions posed by Dr. Abhinav ji. I'll begin by saying that those of you who are interested in the current transitional order, and I think the operative word is transitional. We are in the middle of a full-fledged transition. Take a look at the report by the Munich Security Conference, which is going to conclude tomorrow. They are calling it multipolarization. So those of you, I see a lot of young people, you should take a good look, young and old, you should take a good look at that report, which runs into 100 pages. I was just going through it last night. Thank you very much for making me work over the weekend. But, it was fun. It was fun reading. I was all alone, so it was great. And I think it's a report well worth your time, if you're interested. I want to flesh out something I said yesterday. That's also something I dreamt about. So, and I'm proud to say it'll be the MPAGD at which I first talked about it, and I'd like to write subsequent articles to flesh it out. The more I listen to people, the more I am convinced that India must establish an international political and security forum. It'll be an open-ended forum, but I think it should begin with US, Brazil, EU for sure, Germany, UK, Israel, and UAE for sure, India, of course, and then maybe Japan, Australia to begin with. I think we will have to do this sooner or later. I would not wait for Godot. Sorry, I said Shakespeare. Some illustrious people pointed out it was Samuel Beckett. That doesn't matter, the point is the same. I think we have to get on with it, at least politically speaking. I'm convinced the UNSC is finished. There are people who don't want to reform it. Enough is enough. That's the first point. The second point, on the economic side, I again invite all of you to read an article by Robert Lighthizer in New York Times yesterday. He actually spells out an alternative to the GATT WTO system. And I think that is something you should take seriously, because he was the former USTR and Trump 1.0. He may not be USTR. In fact, for the first time in many years, the administration is interested in keeping the appellate body alive. It's another matter that Barack Obama started this whole process, but the appellate body is moribund. And frankly, the WTO has three functions: negotiating function, dispute settlement function, trade monitoring function. All three, they are failing abysmally. There has been no multilateral agreement except for some fishery subsidies, which is not yet over, and there is simply no negotiation going on except plurilateral. I won't go on and on. Take a look at Robert Lighthizer's proposal. I'm sorry to kind of be a little immodest, but it tracks very closely my proposal on the international peace and security. So I agree with my good friend. I just met him, but I still call him my good friend, Dr. Michael Rubin. I think he's right. You cannot simply put a band-aid on this problem. It has got to be a root and branch reform on political and economic. I address two other issues because the liberal international order, as we know it, is dead. The social aspect of it, which will, I think, have implications for India. On the social side of the liberal international order, as it dies, there is going to be two issues which will matter to India. One is the identity issue. As nation states become more sovereign, it is me versus you. You know, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, whatever. And Muslims might say I'm a Muslim. It doesn't matter, but strong assertions of national identity, strong assertions of ethnic and communal identity are coming to the fore. This will determine how the international order plays out. The corollary to this is immigration. There is an anti-immigration sentiment, whether we like it or not. I worry a little bit about it because on illegal immigration, I'm completely with the Modi administration. I don't like the way these guys have been shackled and brought back to India. But the fact is, there is a terrible ecosystem in India, in villages and small towns, where somebody will approach, a tout will approach an able-bodied man and say, hey, give me 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, I'll get you a passport and a visa to go to the Gulf, without even mentioning which country. And now I understand a lot of people who have gone to Libya did not know they were in Libya. They thought they were in the Gulf. You know, I have interviewed people when I was ambassador of India in Bahrain, without people knowing they are in Bahrain. For a Keralite, the only thing that matters is going to the Gulf. When he marries somebody, his father tells the girl's father, he's in the Gulf. Nobody asks him two questions. Is it Bahrain? Is it Kuwait? Is he cleaning toilets or is he doing something else? Doesn't matter. You are in the Gulf. And that increases your value as a bridegroom. The same thing with Punjabis. You have to go to Canada, right? Doesn't matter where in Canada, what you're doing, doesn't matter. You just need to be there. And you're making money. So this immigration ecosystem, which is illegal, has to stop. But I worry about the legal migration, because my sense is, and I'm addressing now Dr. Abhinav Pandya's legitimate questions, and I have somewhat of a detailed response as well to that. But the initial preliminary response I have is, India simply cannot cope with the current population youth bulge. It's a bit of an opposite problem of what China and Japan and South Korea are facing. This is obviously, my sentiment is, we have averted a demographic disaster, but we haven't been able to fully exploit the demographic dividend. We could have done that if we had invested in health and education. And this has been a disaster. We are still saying Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao after 75 years of independence, for God's sake. I mean, this has got to be shameful, frankly. You go to neighboring Sri Lanka, every girl is illiterate. Every woman is literate. Why couldn't we have done it? Both countries became independent at the same time. What was so different? And people will give you a lot of spiel about Bakranangal. We established the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, IITs. Why the hell did you not put girls in school in 1947? Every boy in India is useless, myself included. I'm only arguing for girls. If you put a girl in school, the whole family changes. Everything changes. Anyway, that's a monumental failure. We're trying to play catch up, but I think it's still an important issue. We need legal migration from India. I remember talking to chief secretaries of Kerala and Punjab, two states which continue to send a lot of people. I told them, why don't we stop this unbridled, irregular immigration? They said, just shut up. You're a whiskey-drinking foreign service officer, pinstripe suits, speak English well. We will have revolutions in Kerala and Punjab if you stop this migration. That's what they told me 5 years ago. So I take it seriously. We need legal migration from India. It's something we will have to negotiate with the West. Nobody wants to migrate to China in large numbers. Nobody wants to migrate to ASEAN, but nobody wants to migrate to Myanmar. But they do want to go to Europe. They do want to go to US. They'll go to Australia. They'll go to New Zealand. So that is something that we need to handle. Last but not least is the military dimension of the transitional order. Military is the only area where the world continues to be unipolar. There is simply no comparison between, take a look at the Stockholm Peace Research Institute, I made a reference to it yesterday. America spends so much more than the other 9 countries which follow. It's a tremendous amount of money that America spends on military. America has scores of military bases. China barely has a single digit, frankly. So there is simply no comparison to military power projection. And despite all the things about technology and drones and so on, at the end of the day, you also need the military hardware. So military is the only area where there is a unipolar world. India's problem is, frankly speaking, the power differential with China, which is the main strategic threat that India faces. We can handle Pakistan, but I think the power differential between India and China today is so significant that India has no choice but to do what international relations scholars call external balancing, which is we need alliances, we need relationships with America, we need relationship with France, we need a relationship with EU, we need relationship with Russia. So all this becomes extremely critical in the military area. To the last question, or lastly, the question that you posed, Abhinavji. Look, I have a somewhat simplistic answer to your question. I wrote a book, and I'm not going to be a traveling salesman for my book, but my book is only 450 rupees, which is the cost roughly of a latte in Starbucks, so please pick it up, for God's sake. I mean, I still think my book is better than Starbucks, and you'll save yourself some health problems by avoiding sugar and caffeine. But this book, India's Moment, wrongly titled in my view, but India's Moment, I argue two things. One, a GDP of $4 trillion for a population of 1.4 billion is nothing short of pathetic. Look at China's GDP, look at US GDP. You are comparing yourself with Canada, France, and Japan. Their populations are less than Saket in Delhi. Exaggeration, but still, you get the drift of what I'm saying. So don't be ridiculous and keep saying you're the 5th largest economy. It is stupid. You 1.4 billion, you should be number 2, if not number 3. Otherwise, don't even talk to me. So this is minuscule. So I've said in my book, we have 800 million people who are availing of a program called Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. I'm sorry for the foreigners in the room, but the Prime Minister's Poor Relief Program, roughly translated. The operative word is poor. So actually we are accepting 800 million people are Garib in this country. 800 million out of 1.4 billion. I have used the word 600 million in my book because it's complicated. The definition of poverty is complicated, but I would still say per capita income is critical. You cannot just go by the GDP. I have argued that if India does not become a 10 trillion economy with a per capita income which is commensurate with what I call a middle income economy. We are now a lower middle income economy. China's per capita is $10,000. I would argue China has no business calling itself a developing country. I would also argue, please respectfully, that China doesn't belong to the global south. Because you're a $10,000 per capita income economy. If India becomes $10,000 per capita income, I would argue India has no business being in the global south. I'm going to apply the same yardstick. It's not that I'm, against somebody or something. You need to have an appreciation of the problems of the global south. What are the problems of the global south that China faces? You've abolished extreme poverty, according to your own admission. Everybody has access to health. Everybody has access to education. So what the hell are we talking about? So I still believe India's primary problem is, and most of the problems that you mentioned on defense, research is another matter. Our universities are still driving people through rote learning and so on. We have to have an ecosystem. I completely agree with you. And even organizations which call themselves research policy think tanks are not producing enough research. We have now started a minor experiment in our university by telling professors, if you do not do a Scopus article every year, you're fired. This is quite dramatic for an Indian university. So we're trying to see how professors can come up, and Scopus is a fairly established system. I'm not saying it's faultless, but still you'll have to make it. It's far easier to write an article for Hindustan Times or India Today. I keep doing it all the time. Now I have to write a Scopus article, which means really, you need to come up with research, and that is important. But all your other issues, you cannot conduct foreign policy on a shoestring budget. That's our main problem. We spent $3 billion in Afghanistan. For India, that's a lot of money, $3 billion. And Taliban came and take over. We have spent $4.5 billion in Sri Lanka. First responder to the crisis in Sri Lanka. Maldives, just the project that links the various atolls in Maldives is $500 billion. So I used to joke when I was Joint Secretary Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Myanmar, that everything was going to Bhutan and everything was going to Nepal. So I would tell them, please give me $500 million for each of my country. I will deliver. That is what your neighboring countries need. If you don't want China to make your backyard their backyard, how are they making it their backyard? What is BRI? At the end of the day, you're doling out money. So you need resources to conduct a foreign policy which is commensurate with a great power. I'll conclude by saying, if you can become a $10 trillion, and 10 trillion should not be that 8 trillion is among 100 people in the country. That makes it very, very unequal. The inequality in India scares me a little bit. I'm 67 years old, but when I was younger, we used to redistribute poverty. That was bad too. Now the trouble is, India has become a fairly unequal country. We're approaching the levels of Latin America, which is saying a lot. So I think there is need for some action there, but ultimately you have to grow the national pie. There is no other way. And that's just the only way in which you can have a better foreign policy, better defense policy. All your defense toys are expensive. We are going to buy stuff from America, we're going to buy stuff from France. Every Rafale costs a hell of a lot. The F-35 is going to set us back by a lot of money. We keep telling them make in India, but that's a bit ridiculous. If I am making money with my proprietary rights, and I know that India is surrounded by Pakistan and China, so you will spend a lot on defense. Why the hell would I come here, transfer technology so that you can do reverse engineering and make it by the millions? This is not pharma industry, right? Pharmaceuticals, you can do that, but these are expensive toys. So why would countries readily, unless you are like China, do reverse engineering? They have done that successfully. You also break down the part and see if you can copy, that's fine. But if you cannot do that, then I'm afraid the only answer to your question really is, I'm reminded of the old saying, it is the economy is stupid. For India, it is really the economy is stupid. Everything will fall into place. If you're a 10 trillion economy, you have the resources to handle defense, handle research, handle poverty. The number of people in extreme poverty or poverty should be down to 200 million. It'll never be zero in my lifetime, I agree. But you cannot have 600, 800 million people standing in a line to get 1 kilo of lentils and 5 kilos of food grains and then say you're going to shape the world of tomorrow. I'm sorry, that's simply not on. So that is where I think the principal challenge lies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kumar. I certainly agree with you that we need to increase the size of the pie and we need more resources, but I would just like to add that we also need a major change in the approach, in the mindset also. You mentioned about the economic rejuvenation. You can't have that unless you have massive and completely transforming governance reforms. Look at your diplomatic cadre. We have an undersized diplomatic cadre. Even Singapore has more diplomats than India. And we're talking about playing a much bigger role in the global diplomacy. You need to bring people who are experts. You need to open up with the lateral entry system. This government tried that, but unfortunately the entire project was sabotaged. So we need a major change in all these, even in the education, we have to make it more vibrant. I see almost 99% of the young students here just desperately trying to get to the government services, mostly civil services, because that is the only thing which brings prestige, power, status, bribery and a good dowry.
Sorry, Abhinav ji, so on some things we are making, I just want to tell the audience that finally next year, the Indian Foreign Service, for the first time in the history of India, will recruit 55 people. We have never taken more than 20 to 30. So we are trying. The problem with lateral entry is not so much the Foreign Service, but it is the steel frame of India. Tejinder Khanna Saab is here. We have tried everything, but the Indian Administrative Service, of course, has changed because the country has changed. And we have some outstanding officers, I'll be the first to admit it, but by recruiting people who are 30 plus, I don't know, sir, I would love to have your views at lunch, but you're just completely changing the character of the service. And typically the Indian Administrative Service, but also the Indian Foreign Service, has become a union. Why should I part with my ambassador's post? Somebody like you will come and say, I am a security expert, mujhe bhej do Paris, why are you sending Mohan Kumar as ambassador? I don't want that. Because I, spent my whole lifetime, I ended up marrying the diplomatic service of India in addition to my wife. I'm here waiting to, biding my time to become an ambassador. So there are issues. Yeah. I mean, there was a very interesting proposal from the Indian Administrative Service that they should merge with the Foreign Service. You know who objected to it? The Foreign Service. We said, my God, all these IAS guys will go to Paris, London, and they will give us Barabanki, Jhumri Talaya Collector, Etava, we will be dead. So we immediately said, no. Please keep your IAs to yourself. We are quite happy doing our Mali and Colombia and whatever. So this is where we are. And I'm sorry to say a bit of a union in that sense. So the governance aspect, one thing the government is trying to do is to get people to accept voluntary retirement and go home if you're not interested. But that has limits. But I'm afraid Mr. Modi tried very hard. I cannot reveal personal conversations which I was privy to, not with me, but I just happened to be there. But I think he tried, but now it is beyond anybody's genius in India to get rid of the strangled hold of the steel frame, whether it is the administrative service, the foreign service, or the IRS, or whatever. So, subject to that, I would say the challenge for India is if the government can get out of the way and allow the private sector to flourish, I'm quite happy. Allow the universities to function. The University Grants Commission should not be like an Ayatollah issuing diktats to universities. Now that I belong to a private university, second, I'm on the other side of the fence now. I'm begging the Ministry of External Affairs. 1962, we lost the war with China. There was a bloody commission. Why don't you allow academics to look at the commission report? Why are we behaving like authoritarian countries and saying we will keep that report confidential? What is it that you will know that you don't know already? China trashed you. You were unprepared. You made mistakes. Is the report going to be anything more than this? Maybe the report will provide evidence of this, but we will still keep it classified and confidential. Twice Nehru wrote to America, to two presidents of America, asking them for help. The 1962 war, asking for squadrons, American squadrons to be based in India. This was non-aligned India, asking the United States of America, please give us troops. Why don't you make the letters? One of my students had to fly all the way to Washington to get, because they have, declassified. So we are accessing things from America, not from India. That doesn't make any sense. So I think we should be a little bit more open. I'll stop here. I think I've taken too much time. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Kumar. So now we have about 10 minutes and 4 quick questions for our panelists.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for giving me time. So my question is, I've been hearing amazing, and my question is very simple. United Nations General Secretary yesterday came out and said that AI is an existential crisis for humanity. Okay, it is deafening now. And AI is becoming as sentient. I'm also watching emergency orders coming out. I'm also watching the barriers being created for this technology. What I believe, and that is a question too, that the first thing with AI, what we are doing, the countries like China and countries, even America and others are doing it, they are weaponizing it. Okay, they are creating budget bots. But AI has got a huge potential for humanity, for technological abundance, and creating our lives, or making our lives, 9.1 billion humanity people, better. So why can't we be truthful? Why can't we start thinking about sharing this technology, leverage the innovation capacity and capability of humanity across, create a responsible and ethical AI so that humanity benefits? In Indian mythology, we have got a saying that the last Samudra Manthan or Gyan Manthan we pulled out halal, which Lord Shiva put it in each kant and known as Nilkant. But the second thing which came out was Amrit. So we have got an opportunity to pull Amrit out, and that is something we should be focusing in, collaborating and working together. So why can't we be truthful?
Thank you, Mr. Mohan. I'll request the audience to keep the I wanted to just raise the issue for comments of the very distinguished panelists. You know, so far, a lot of the problems that we have encountered globally in terms of all kinds of warfare and clashes and so on between competing interests is eventually the culmination of a lack of dialogue, a lack of being able to sit together and try and work out a solution before actually you engage in conflicts, armed conflicts and violence and everything. I remember in the 2016 campaign for the US presidency, when President Trump was campaigning, one of the things he said at the beginning, he would like to develop a very good relationship with Russia. And he said, if we have good relations between the United States and Russia, we should be able to together work out and resolve a number of hotspots, potential hotspots of conflict in the world. I have a small group of people from the civil service, from the diplomatic community, used to sit and have coffee once in a month. And all of us said, this is such an excellent thing he is trying to do, because he is breaking away from the long-standing Cold War mentality that the biggest enemy and challenger and competitor of the United States is Russia. And when we talk about deep state, that whole mentality that the biggest challenge remains Russia, even after the breakup of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, was just a persistence which you find in Newton's first law of inertia. An object will continue in a state of rest or uniform motion unless acted upon by a force. The problem is, in the US political establishment, there were very few voices suggesting rapprochement and bringing a new kind of relationship, not a contesting and sort of hostile relationship, but a cooperative relationship with Russia. The first time we heard it, President Trump, 2016. With China, same thing. I'm asking, why can't we have much closer dialogue between the so-called superpowers and try to resolve areas of global conflict between in a format of discussion? This is a Maratha dialogue, not a monologue. What creates problems are monologues, and what resolves problems are dialogues, whether it's multilateral or regional. Thank you.
Thank you.
Two more quick questions. Just two questions. Please, Ambassador sir, one quick question. Ambassador Haq.
Simple question that arises after listening to Ambassador Mohan Kumar, that what we citizens need to do to break this steel framework or the union of bureaucrats, what citizens should do.
Thank you very much. I'll request you to answer the question. I mean, after that we can have other panelists also.
Let me first address the issue of the dialogue. I think that you are absolutely right. We don't have enough dialogue, or maybe what they call minilateral dialogues in the current international system. And I think that the reason for that is that in some countries, not just in one or two, but in many countries, dialogue is interpreted as a privilege to your partner. You can grant this privilege or you can take it away. And by taking it away, you punish and you express your disagreement with what your partner or your adversary is doing. I think it's a wrong approach, and I hope that this approach will be replaced by a more open approach to the international relations. But let me also tell you, as a kind of caveat or footnote, it's not only about a dialogue, it's about the quality of a dialogue. Because I recall times when we in Moscow had 2 summits a year with the European Union. 2 summits a year. Huge bureaucratic enterprise. All countries were involved. There were more communications between Moscow and Brussels than between Brussels and any other external player. Did it help us? No. It didn't help us because it was not an honest and open, a blunt dialogue exposing not just issues where we agreed, but issues where we disagreed. If we had been more honest with each other, if we had been more open with each other, probably we would have avoided the crisis that followed later. So we have to keep in mind the quality of the dialogue and the readiness to share, not just in the spirit of mutual admiration what you like about your partner, but also what you dislike. To some extent, I would say we have sort of the same problem between Russia and India, because when you engage into discussions with Indian friends, it's often about how great you are, how great we are, how we like each other, which is right. But it's not the whole picture. It's a part of the picture, and we have to definitely address more sensitive, more controversial, and potentially more divisive aspects of the relationship. And also, let me just very briefly on artificial intelligence. I don't think that there is any solution that would fit everybody. We have to compartmentalize artificial intelligence. I don't think that we can come with a charter that will define the rules of the game in this very broad domain. But we might start with small coalitions of the willing countries which are ready to play by the rules, and then gradually expand. I don't think that there is another way to approach the problem. Thank you.
So, sir, I completely agree with you on the dialogue issue, and not at all to disagree with you. The only problem is, if you take the India-China border issue, 22 rounds of special representatives, and years. I don't want to seem unfair to my Chinese colleagues who are here. It's very clear they don't want to settle. They say keep the border issue aside and let us get on with bilateral relation. Because I can understand 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 22 rounds of special representatives talking, and no progress at all on the border issue. Then you have to start wondering whether one country or the other really is genuine about solving the issue. That is one problem. But otherwise, what you say about dialogue is absolutely correct. Ambassador Huq, I don't want to leave the audience with the impression that all of the steel frame is bad. Steel frame has played the Indian Administrative Service, known as the steel frame, has also played an important role in India. You have to read Kilnani's idea of India. Unity of India. You have a lot of northern Indian IAS officers serving in the south of India. I belong to the south, and I think their presence in the south is extremely important. It is very important that you have an all-India cadre. It leads to unity, it leads to territorial integrity. I would say some of them are absolutely outstanding in individual district. I still tell my young people who are very keen to join the foreign service, but some of them are keen to join the administrative service. I still tell them, you want to make the biggest difference to lives of people, don't join the foreign service, join the IAS. Notwithstanding politicians. Kya karenge? What is the maximum that will happen? You will go from Barabanki to Jhumri Talaya, but they can't dismiss you. You will still be able to make a difference in Jhumri Talaya. That is the approach. That service is an amazing service. Although I had the choice and I did not join, and that is my single regret is, if the UPSC had told me 10 years I will keep you as district collector, I would have joined the administrative. Problem is, after 2 years they put you to the central secretariat and you are pushing files. So the steel frame is important. But if you take issues like land and labor, which are very important for foreign investment in India, the government has to get out of the way. You cannot have, people are saying you go to Singapore, 48 hours you are able to establish a company. You go to places like Dubai, it's 4 days. We say 45 days, but the 45 days actually becomes 4-6 months. And 6 months, you might say, by an Indian context, the concept of time in India is cyclical. That's why the word kal in Hindi means both yesterday and day after. It is cyclical. But in most societies, the concept of time is linear. If I tell you tomorrow, it means tomorrow 10 o'clock. But in our case, you never know what kal means. It could be yesterday, it could be day after. So, there is this philosophical problem as well. But having said that, if we can get the bureaucracy, this is the eternal dilemma in India between red tape and red carpet. We have to swing towards red carpet, not keep hanging on to red tape. We need to extend the red carpet to people who want to come here and invest. That approach, I think, is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kumar. Well, it took me about 1.5 years to establish this non-profit think tank. So, yeah. So 6 months, and that too, some very grueling and embarrassing, rounds with the income tax department and various other departments. So, I request Dr. Vivi to answer the question on the dialogues, and then we have Dr. Rubin who will answer the question. Yeah. Okay.
First question concerning AI. As the Chinese approach is, as the case of DeepSeek shows, AI should be for good. The philosophy behind DeepSeek is open source, and each and every village can afford new AI technology whatsoever. So it's called the people-centered philosophy. And with this kind of new scientific progress and whatever new AI breakthroughs, indeed, it's always a double-edged sword, positive, negative. So the Chinese approach is also dialectical. We think we should maximize its benefits and minimize possibly its defects. So we embrace it openly, courageously. At the same time, we try to tackle whatever issues on the way. Yeah, but we disagree with this Silicon Valley approach, monopolize everything, super profit for the super rich. We think this is not for mankind, right way for mankind. Concerning this clashes and dialogues, I am really in favor of more and more dialogues. Indeed, being civilizational state, I always say, we are not simply nation state. We are a civilization state. Samuel Huntington said, some countries within one civilization have clashes with some countries within another civilization. But he did not talk about one civilization, one modern state. And they are rising, as case with China, with Russia, with India, and other civilizational communities are also rising. And one key message from China is a civilizational state. Our approach is highly different from the American approach. American approach is very clear, friend or foe, either with us or against us. Chinese philosophy is a much long-term framework. We believe in friend and potential friend. Just now, I think one expert mentioned this Sino-Indian dialogue for over decades, over border issues, without any solution. In fact, China has resolved all the border disputes through negotiations with all the neighboring countries, except India. And with small country, Bhutan, which can be resolved within 24 hours, if without India, whatever interference, we can do this easily. Now, the point is, perhaps, China has already put forward certain, I think, very positive ideas. For instance, let's put aside disputes over borders. Let's develop other aspects of bilateral relations. Or let's focus on common development within the disputed areas. Let's first make development first, and then see what will happen. So these are very, possibly new approaches to the whatever disputes. As for the bureaucracy issue, I don't make any comments. I know it's not easy.
Okay, very quickly, I just want to disagree with the premise of the first two questions. First of all, I really don't care what the Secretary General of the United Nations says. His job is to manage the United Nations bureaucracy. No one chose him to, they chose him to provide a platform, not be the platform. But to the heart of the question, realistically, we're not going to have broad cooperation on AI if we don't trust each other, and so long as several countries aren't transparent, it's simply not going to happen. I actually happen to agree with Dr. Kortanov with regard to coalitions of the willing, mutual interest, and so forth. With regard to dialogue, I actually wrote a book on this called Dancing with the Devil. If you order, then you get a vampire romance. Wrong book. But the point of this is that I would argue that it's a myth that dialogue is always a solution or that dialogue doesn't have a cost. Ideology doesn't compromise, and one of the costs to dialogue is legitimizing opponents, being the Taliban, being Hamas, perhaps even in the future the Islamic State or what have you. Again, I go into this notion of diplomacy as an asymmetric warfare strategy if we're not all operating from the same values. With regard to the debate over Russia and China, I would also disagree with the premise because these have been decades-long debates in the United States. The debate and the attitudes towards China only solidified during the first Trump administration, but they are truly bipartisan. And the debates with regard to Russia are still ongoing, obviously. But the decision to go to war in Ukraine by the Russian government actually put those debates, had a tremendous impact on the general American assessment with regard to Russia. Lastly, I would just point out with regard to the bureaucracy, what I've always found in India, what I've always found amazing is when Hong Kong lost its freedom and many Western companies decided they wanted to leave Hong Kong. They chose not to come to India, but instead to go to Singapore or even Vietnam, a one-party, theoretically communist state, over India because of the reaction to the Indian bureaucracy. And with that, let me turn the floor back over.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks all the speakers for this very enlightening and engaging session. I wish we had more time, but we have another session waiting. So with this we come to the end and the last point. Definitely dialogues are very important, sir, but if you don't have the right intent behind the dialogues, people can go on talking. People can go on talking for hours and hours just for the sake of talking. So you need to have a right intent and a clear picture in mind that what I want to achieve from this dialogue, and also a desire to come to a common ground. Only then dialogues will succeed. And having said that, we also need to be very firm that there are certain entities with which there should be no room for dialogue, like organizations like ISKP, Taliban, because for them dialogues are just tactical measures. Thank you. Thank you very much.